In this video, we discuss some of the top stocks on our watch list and in our portfolios right now.
So if we move on to our last subject of the video, what are the top 3 stocks you're currently looking at the moment, Henry?
Top 3 stocks. So, I mean, as we said, like my largest holding is actually Google right now as time of recording. We talked about Google. Uber's another really large holding of mine. I like Uber. Again, it's good, steady growth at a reasonable price. They're almost hitting that 20% mark. They're only trading about 25 times forward cash flow, 25 times forward earnings, something like that. And what I like about them is their existing business is steady, but they are in prime position to be a demand aggregator for autonomous driving without having to invest copious amounts into the R&D and underlying technology. And what I mean by that is just now when we were talking about Monday.com, we were looking at the network effect. With Uber, there's an additional moat added onto that because the network is time sensitive. So, you know, if Uber's the market leader, autonomous driving or not, and you want to get somewhere from A to B, I mean, literally 2 days ago, I was late walking to the station, needed an Uber. Uber's also a verb, right? Like, I'm not going to go on to Lyft or some slower platform because the network effect, there's more drivers on Uber than on Lyft. So I'm more likely to get a faster Uber than on Lyft and then hence make my train. So there's like this time sensitive aspect on there of the network effect, which I really like. Dara, and I'm not going to pronounce his last name, has been a really good CEO of Uber. Everyone just calls him Dara. I think
I do that so many times on my videos. Is I look at the CEO and I go, "This is the one CEO where I'm just going to say either the last name or the first name."
Sure, but as no disrespect, he's great. Everyone calls him Dara, but he's been CEO of Uber since 2017, so he's much. I know he's not the founder, but he's much more of a founder than if he'd just come in 2021. And Uber was suffering quite a lot in 2017. They obviously led Uber through IPO, which was in 2019. So Uber a really interesting business. You know, good risk reward, I'd say. And that's the thing is that, like, yeah, if Tesla takes 100% of the autonomous driving market, just like that, that's a headwind for Uber, absolutely. But if you get all of these companies coming in and taking 10% market share, you know, a few percent to Waymo, a few percent to all the others, I think Waymo will get more than a few percent, but I think they'll be one of the leaders. But that is where Uber benefits because they will all need Uber and it'll be a gradual transition. So I like Uber. And we said, I mean, sticking on autonomous driving, I won't talk much about it now, but Aurora do autonomous trucking.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a big video on Aurora on my channel. But that's a very spicy one because they're pre-revenue. You are investing in an idea. It's just that the size of the industry and how far they are ahead, that makes me interested, but that's a small holding. And another company I bought recently was Confluent. And they do data streaming for basically that's going to be really useful in agentic AI. So as I was saying earlier, as we have AI that actually interacts with us and learns off real-time input, so obviously most large language models at the moment, they're batch trained. So they get trained on some data. Eventually they get retrained on more data. Eventually they get retrained on more data. I think there's going to be more real-time use cases for AI, and Confluent's kind of that back office pipe that helps data flow, or they're the enterprise solution for that. A Kafka is the open source pipe, and there are a couple of others, but the founders of Kafka also founded Confluent to basically help enterprises use Kafka. Kafka is quite difficult to deploy if you don't have a massive team. So large companies like Uber build this data pipeline from the ground up. A lot of companies in the future will need to use Confluent. That's kind of the thesis there. And I've got videos on my channel about all of those. But let me know if you've got any questions on that, Jacob, or also which stocks you're looking at.
Yeah, I think Uber is probably the one that is probably most interesting to me. Matty is on the private group. He's a big fan of Uber, and he was at me to try buy it about a year ago when it was about $60, and maybe should have got in then. With Uber, I was kind of sleeping a little bit when they were doing. I thought it was going to be a bit more of a battle between like them and Lyft, but Uber seems to be the dominant player now, and obviously, like we were saying there, they got that catchphrase, Uber it. And I guess, the thing with Uber is that it's just a lot more worldwide now than Lyft. You know, if you go to Paris, you get that Uber. You go to Barcelona, you get Uber, and that's the benefit I guess Uber has now, is it's that kind of expansion. So you get more used to just straight away going to Uber now, and that's been a real big benefit for it.
That's actually true. I've just thought of something. So America's, okay, on the whole, has terrible public transport, right? America is still like, Uber makes more revenue from America than any other country. However, Uber's a very global company, right? They don't make most of their revenue in America, but America's number one. So Americans don't take a lot of public transport. So when Americans travel, they're typically going to choose Uber. The thing is about Lyft is big in America, Bolt is quite big in Europe, but when Americans go on holiday, okay, maybe some of them will use public transport around Barcelona, but if you just need to get from A to B, we all tend to take a lot of Ubers when we're on holiday, particularly if we're going out in the evenings and that kind of stuff. They'll just be like, boom, Uber, because Lyft is either not in the country, in Europe or somewhere else, or is very slow, because there's not many, demand aggregation is just much slower. And you're right, Uber's just been a verb, like Google it. You know, instead of getting a temporary holiday accommodation, we're getting Airbnb. It's become one of those verbs.
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the things that's been overhanging Uber is this kind of, if all driverless cars comes a big thing, but now they've got this partnership with Google and Waymo. I think that's kind of covered that issue as well a little bit in the short term, and that's probably going to be a good benefit for them in the longer term.
Yeah, I think it's good that they've got a diverse partnership with them. And my point is that Waymo, they are building their own app. And yeah, like autonomous driving enthusiasts are going to go on that app. But when it actually comes to marketing the masses, Uber's got the distribution on that. And eventually at scale, Waymo are going to realize, oh, we're going to go onto Uber. And Uber can advertise like, you can take this car or you can take the full self-driving car. Some people are going to take the full self-driving car because it's cool. But at scale, it's going to be cheaper. Because when you order an Uber, revenue is about 30% of bookings. So 70% of the fee goes to the driver. Uber takes a 30% cut. What does that mean is in the taxi business or in the rideshare business, at least half of the cost is the driver. So that cost is removed. So hence at scale, autonomous cars are cheaper. So hence when Uber says, oh, you're getting from A to B, you're going to get a driver who's a person for like $50, or you're going to get a self-driving car for like $30 or $25. And they realize, okay, autonomous driving cars are safer. But if it's late at night, the drivers, there's no risk of a driver being creepy. Not that many of them are, but you're always like, you're thinking about that, particularly if you're a woman. And there's a lot of advantages to it.
Yeah, and I think if this self-driving car, taxis do take off, I think Google and Uber will work very well together, because I don't think Google would like to set up their own app and they just go straight, directly to someone like an Uber who already have the customers there waiting for them. They put the driverless cars out on the Uber app, and then Google basically gets all that customer base straight away. Uber just takes a cut for basically renting the app out, and for Uber, they don't have to do all this hiring with these drivers. They don't have any of these horror stories anymore with these drivers, because obviously the driverless cars, and both Google and Uber would win from the situation. Google has the customers provided to them by Uber already waiting for them, and Uber basically just takes the cut for renting out their app out to them basically.
Absolutely. And I think the more that scenario is even more likely if other autonomous driving players start to catch up to Waymo, which they are starting to do. Like there are a lot of companies that are testing in different cities. If Waymo was like 10 years ahead of everyone else, Waymo were ahead. But if they were decades ahead of everyone else, they may say, okay, it's going to be easy enough to build that demand aggregator. Uber have got hundreds of millions of monthly active users, or I think it's 130 million or something like that. They do billions of trips a year. So if Google were like 10 years ahead, then they could afford to do that. If they're not 10 years ahead, and I don't think they are nearly 10 years ahead, because these other companies are starting to come up now, they're not going to risk that, because they've done these self-driving cars. They want to get them out. They want to get them making revenue. They want to get their name out there. Uber's advertising for them. You know what I'm saying? Uber's actually advertising their vehicles. So Uber's going to be like a marketplace for full self-driving car companies to then provide their service.
Yeah, and onto my top three stocks. I would say that the ones that I like as my biggest holdings right now are probably Mercado Libre, AMD, and Google. Obviously, we've already talked about a lot about AMD and Google already. Into stocks that I'm really interested at the moment. It's hard to find value at the moment, but the two that probably stand out to me are DLocal at the moment and Adobe. I don't know if Adobe is one that you're interested in.
Amazing. Wow.
Is
Okay.
is
So, okay, let's start with like your big three. As we said, we talked about Alphabet. We're both big holders of Alphabet. We're both big holders of Mercado Libre. I think that's fantastic, and I agree with you. I think there's really good value in South America. And I looked at DLocal this morning. You could tell me exactly what happened in their business because they had some slow growth, but it was saying that their forecasted revenue growth is now back up to 36%. And obviously, we know the thesis in South America for payments. A lot of people still don't have bank accounts, there's a massive demand for the payment infrastructure.
Mhm.
Things are changing very, very fast there. So I'm really interested to hear a lot more about DLocal because you know me, I'm a growth man, and I see very fast growth there.
Yeah, and it's a pretty good valuation. Yeah, we do local. I'll try sum it up in a few minutes, but honestly, there's been so much drama. It's more than an episode of Coronation Street with it, so I'll try my best to sum it up in a few minutes. But yeah, DLocal I've been in for about a year. Originally, I was underwater for a while, and then recently just gone back into the positive after its recent jump off earnings, which were really incredible earnings to be fair from it. Yeah, basically the drop happened because basically it had a perfect storm of everything that went wrong for it. It had a big impact. It had the issues that were happening with Argentina, if you're aware what was happening in Argentina in the time. And as well as that, it had a customer that did big repricing from it, and basically all those three things basically just hit it all at once, and it got absolutely whacked. That was about a year ago now, and basically now it's moved on from all those impacts hitting it a year ago. So now it's got really easy comps, and in fact all those big headwinds for it have actually turned into big tailwinds for it, and that's why now you're seeing those issues kind of going out with the business, and now you're seeing that big surge in growth. And as we saw with the recent earnings, the company's growing at 30+% at the moment, and yet with a cracking balance sheet, high profit margins, high growth, and even though it's been performing well, I'd actually look at the valuation, and even though it's had a bit of a jump at the moment, I still don't think that the valuation is pretty fairly reflecting the performance of the business here.
Mm. Yeah, looking at it on a snapshot, I think it looks pretty cheap right now, pretty good value. Is there any overlap with Mercado Pago? I know it's like a massive industry and it's also a massive population, but can they complement each other?
Yeah, not really, because we do local. It's actually like managing the payments. It's actually taking on the payments and converting the whatever the current local currency is into dollars. So that for the obviously these US companies, and then obviously managing the payments, taking on the risk. Also, a bit of fraud protection as well to when the payments are coming in as well and managing it. So yeah, it's different kind of company really towards the likes of New Holdings and Mercado Pago.
Wow. Yeah, I mean it's a big market, and I can still see DLocal at 3.7 billion market cap. I like it from a valuation perspective, and I can see as well they're quite optimized on the bottom line, or they're at least making good money on the bottom line. So I can see that fits in well. 19 forward PE, 22 forward free cash flow. I actually really like this. I'm going to add it to my watch list.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting, and it's got a cracking balance sheet as well, and those high profit margins, like you were saying, and they generate that amount of profitability, that much of profitability. They're buying shares back like crazy as well, and they actually at the moment have bought that many shares back that the management team actually came out and said, look, we can't buy any more shares back because it's going to make our stock, super well, a lack of liquidity. So we can't do any more of a share buyback at the moment. So the only other option we have to kind of attract you in is to do a dividend. So they actually in the last year actually paid out a special dividend, and I think the special dividend was a yield of over 5%, which is just absolutely incredible.
Wow, that's amazing. It's always good to see when they're very confident to buy back a lot of shares, because obviously it's telling you that the internal management that know the company better than anybody is confident it's a good time to buy back. And
No problems.
I definitely agree with you that Adobe is a good value right now. It's
Oh wow,
you know
I was expecting you to not be Adobe fan.
Well, it's funny. Like I did have a small holding in Adobe that I bought in January because it's a classic. What you were describing, like good value. Is Adobe going anywhere? Probably not. It is a really good value, right? Like 17 forward PE, 17 forward free cash flow, and they're forecasted to grow at 9.6 on the top line. And last year they grew at 10.8, but the year before that they grew 10.2. So they had a re-acceleration of revenue last year. So I like that. Quantitatively, it looks lovely, and I know that they had some really impressive AI stuff a few years ago with Adobe Firefly. But I'd just be interested to know your thoughts on if you think they've got enough. Like they clearly have good data for AI creative stuff. They've clearly got great distribution. It's just a question of, in the long run, if the companies with massively powerful AI, like what Google's been able to do, will start to eat away at Adobe's market.
Yeah, well, obviously, this one is another one that is, is it going to get disrupted by AI? And it's kind of got Google vibes written all over it all again, where the market's kind of thrown it out, doesn't want it. And obviously now they're realizing with Google that actually there might be something here with the AI business, and I think that's going to be the same with Adobe. Really, I think they got off to a bad start, a bit like Google. They brought the Firefly out, and that could have been a bit better than what it was. But ultimately, I look at someone like Adobe, and even if they aren't got the not got the best products right now, who do you probably want to back in this space? It's Adobe. How much money they're going to have in the ability to throw off just to throw at this AI product to try and make the best in class. That's probably the one that you'd probably want to be backing, wouldn't you? The one with the big money to make the best AI projects that they could make available for them. And I think overall, people keep brushing off saying, "Oh, we don't need these editing programs," but I think with someone like Adobe, I think the best of both worlds here with this AI and editing programs is that you have your Photoshop, but you have your AI in the Photoshop, because AI is not going to do everything exactly how you want it to do it, and you want to do it yourself manually sometimes, and it's going to take AI still many more years to get probably close to the perfect way that you wanted it. I think it's eventually going to get tied into where we have the Photoshop, but you have the AI platform working alongside it.
That's very true. That's very true. And you're right. They've done it before. They've got the distribution. And I think that also, I don't know the management team very well. I know that they've had the same CEO since 2007. So he's been there for a long time, which could be a blessing or a curse. But I certainly don't think they're just going to kind of be chillax about AI, because it's a two-sided coin with something like Adobe. If they win, then they win, but at the same time, there's also disruption risk. So they've got massive potential tailwinds if they get it right, because they've already got the distribution and all the legacy customers, and they've actually had a really good history of always improving their products. It's just the flip side of that is like, yeah, if they don't, then they obviously understand that there's disruption. And I just like the fact that the growth rate has not really slowed down that much. It's slower compared to pre-pandemic, but they're much larger. Like they're still kind of, this is the thing, is they're ticking along at 10% growth rate, but they're ticking along at 10% growth rate when the multiples are probably lower than they should be. So that means like, yeah, you're going to get higher multiples plus a 10% growth rate. Every time they grow 10% and the stock doesn't move, those multiples are getting lower. So it's getting better and better value. So yeah, I could absolutely see why that works in the portfolio.